Welcome to Second Earth Alternative. This is Felipe speaking. Today, we're going to be going over a video with Joe Rogan and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he's a skeptic, a scientist, astrophysicist, somebody who we've actually talked very often. I must have brought him up like 6-7 times in the channel, but he's somebody who's so skeptical about UFOs that he would actually make what I thought was erroneous arguments, which is the reason why we made so many episodes about him. And because he used to kind of make fun of ufologists. We even counted the amount of times that he laughed at people who believe in UFOs, if you haven't seen it. 1.
Object. Okay. This is a
2.
That thing is not a space alien.
It's unidentified.
Okay.
So.
That's not good enough.
Well, you cannot, as a next sentence, say, therefore it must be anything.
Yes, but you know what we're looking at. You stare at the cosmos for a living.
I'm not authorized to go beyond this part.
3.
But we're still...
4.
Okay, that's where we differ. You're cool.
5.
Bring him into Times Square. No, there are too many weird people.
So, after the Pentagon has admitted that UFOs are real, after the US Navy, or at least certain personnel, have admitted that UFOs are real, after jet fighters have talked about impossible physics, talking about nuclear weapons that was essentially stopped on the dime. This is something that was confirmed by Christopher Mellon, who worked for intelligence. So we're talking about objects that are doing things that, in every understanding that we have about science and what physics is capable of allowing, that these things seem to be doing something that it's just, how do you say, it's extraordinary to the point of being very feasible that it's extraterrestrial. And you see, the issue is Neil deGrasse Tyson is kind of like the definition of a hard-nosed skeptic. In my opinion, the chickens have come to roost. It could explain why he seemed unusually annoyed, maybe ruder than I've seen him before. But hey, that makes it even more enjoyable for those who are really into the subject of UFOs and extraterrestrial aliens. So without further ado, let's go ahead and play this video.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
And in another case, I saw it was a magpie, one of these birds known for how smart it is. There was a full, half-liter, plastic thing of water. It was just water, okay? A water bottle. And it was full.
So I'm only going to show so much to essentially make my point, but he's kind of talking about animal intelligence, and he's talking about how the magpies displace water with rocks, essentially raising the water by placing rocks inside a water bottle. And it speaks to how intelligent certain birds are. And I've always told people when I was studying psychology that we are drastically underestimating the intelligence of animals. And that's exactly the point that he makes. But I think he's trying to say that to take away the concept that perhaps humans are so different in this world. And if we are more like animals, then maybe we weren't made by anybody. Maybe we are endemic to this planet. Because Joe Rogan always makes the point that, look, we don't have hair. We're so different than every other animal. We do things that no other animals do. We don't have any natural defense systems. So I didn't catch the conversation before this, but I get a feeling that's where he's heading. So I'm just going to fast forward just a little bit.
There it is.
So he shows the bird.
So maybe for our own ego, we kept building ourselves up, saying how separate and distinct we are as humans in the animal kingdom, when maybe we're not as separate and distinct as we think we are.
What I find so ironic when he mentions our ego and that essentially preventing us from believing that animals are smart, well, I think that's the exact same thing with Neil deGrasse Tyson and his beliefs that everything can be explained away with science and that he's some hotshot astrophysicist who knows everything. But look, I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to say that Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's got an ego. And being as hard-nosed skeptic as he is, and given how much he talked crap about UFOs before all this information came out, I have to wonder, is his ego preventing him from seeing the potential truth?
Oh, now what's my broader point there about that I was making? I just distracted
Something
myself.
about UFOs.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to get back to UFOs on that.
The fact that we have high-resolution cameras in our pocket and we take videos of things that are very unusual.
Exactly. So here's video of a magpie doing Bernoulli experiments on a water bottle. Who would have known that even happened, right?
Right.
Okay. You can't bring the bird into a lab and maybe you could, but I don't know that anyone did. All right. Here's my point. In the 1960s and 70s, there were many, many reports of alien abductions. People said, the aliens came to me and they brought me in and then they released me. Do you have any footage? No, they took my camera. Or no, they zapped my film and now there's no image on the film. But there were countless stories. Well, now you can stream live from your camera anything that's going on in front of you. So if the aliens come and they want to abduct you, stream it. That would be instantly viral. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Like people wouldn't want to stream it if it was possible. Now, I don't have to go too far to mention somebody like Bob Bigelow, a billionaire, somebody who actually works with NASA by supplying them space capsules. Now, he used to own a ranch called the Skinwalker Ranch. Maybe some of you know about it. I'm being sarcastic, of course. I know a lot of you know about it. But the point is that one of the big issues with this Skinwalker Ranch is that no matter how many times they attempt to capture evidence, the evidence is always wiped away. Either the batteries of the camera or the phone drain out, or suddenly they think they're videotaping it, but suddenly the video malfunctions. You know, it's like a really bad case of the Jeffrey Epstein claimed suicide, where every single camera just happens to break down. Now, I think every camera broke down because there's probably something more. Let's call it a higher intelligence that didn't want that video to be out there. And so similarly with UFOs and aliens, we can't answer this speculative question of what is their modus operandi, or actually more specifically, why is it that their modus operandi is that of secrecy? That's all speculation. But to assume that it's possible that they would want to be secrets, and to assume that if they can get from another star or another dimension or another time and actually make it here, if they have that type of technology and they want to stay secrets, why would I not assume that they don't have the capability of disrupting our devices and our ability to measure them? It's why I said that science is so difficult to use, at least hard experimental science, to try to verify that UFOs and aliens exist. I've always said because aliens, in this particular case, are the confounding variable. Because they are more intelligent, see, science is only built to essentially study the natural phenomenon, something that we can control, that we can control our environment, thus erase all confounding variables and make very probabilistic conclusions. But you can't do that when you're studying something that is inherently smarter than you, and thus can affect evidence. I'm surprised he doesn't even address this. Like, he just kind of goes for that joke like, oh yeah, it's all about viral. It would be greatest in TikTok. Like, really, dude?
Stuff that goes viral is much less than that. A kitten that jumps to the table and falls, that goes viral? You don't think a video footage of an alien is not going to go viral instantly? But there's none. So I'm just saying, I'm thinking if we were being visited, somebody would have some good footage.
Obviously, you're not thinking, because that assumption is just an assumption. And like I said, I don't have to go over that argument again, but I think the audience gets it.
Visited? I'm thinking maybe Google satellite images would catch spaceships that are not airplanes moving on our surface. If we were being visited, I'm thinking we'd have something better than fuzzy monochromatic video.
I think it is amazing that he actually makes that comparison where he says, well, maybe if UFOs are real, then it would have been captured by Google, by some kind of satellite. I should mention that one of the most famous UFO photos taken all the way back, I believe it was like in the late 70s, and over Lake Adenau. And this particular photo is remarkable because it was taken by a group of scientists, I think, that had connections with National Geographic, as well as certain military from the Costa Rican Public Forces. I think that's what it's called. I don't think they have an Air Force. But what I'm trying to say is there were military personnel there. There are individuals from National Geographic. They were trying to do a topographical study over Lake Adenau, and they were using a $100,000 camera that was loaned to them by the German government. This wasn't a cell phone. It wasn't some garbage evidence. This was literally one of the most expensive cameras that you could purchase at the time, being loaned to researchers, people who have a scientific foundation, and it gets captured over in the topographical study, which is almost the same as being captured by a satellite. It's basically an airplane that's really high up, gazing down and actually finding something in between. So that's happened, sir. I'm sorry that you're not familiar with all the evidence.
Of objects that apparently reveal themselves only to Navy pilots, right? So
Well, one of the reasons is most of these sightings actually occur far offshore in the ocean. And the speculation is this is one of the ways, no, obviously I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on nice and tight.
Do your thing.
This is one of the ways that they monitor us. The best way to do it is to do it where they're hold their base where no one is around, which is the ocean.
no, that's
So
not
they
true.
go in the ocean, they pop up, and they fly out.
It's not true.
He's
What
so
do you mean
rude.
It's not true. Yeah, nobody lives on the ocean. Yes, that's correct.
In the
but
ocean.
have you? Well, so it lives down undersea.
This is what the speculation
Oh, okay.
is.
It lives down
That's
undersea.
why these transmedium
No, it's not true.
devices have been,
Okay.
these transmedium crafts have been observed.
If you
Okay, so I just wanted to quickly make the point that it could also be the U.S. Navy, because Bob Lazar, for example, he was getting paid by Navy intelligence. And from our research with all the UFO documents, it seems that the Air Force was either out of the loop in terms of the information, because that one document that we talk about all the time with the CIA and the way that they sponsored the 1953 Robertson's panel that was set up to essentially study the wave of sightings over the White House in 1952, well, the Air Force was begging the CIA for more information about the Robertson's panel, and the CIA would not give it to them. So I'm not sure if the Air Force is just out of the loop or if they're a little bit more disconnected to this entire topic. But it's always been the U.S. Navy that seems to have had either an interest or has had some kind of intelligence built upon studying these crafts.
are sure we are being visited by
I'm definitely
aliens,
not
and
sure.
you don't actually have really good evidence, then you have to say that. Sure.
Well, you know that
You have to say that. You have to say, this is really happening, and they're observing us, and they're concealing themselves in this particular way. You have to say that. That's your way to maintain your alien belief system, by saying that.
God, oh my God, that makes me so, makes me angry, man. Because his argument is that just because we're observing something, then we're all kooks who are validating our own beliefs with the observation. But as I was stating earlier, if somebody's modus operandi is secrecy, then Neil deGrasse Tyson would be their essentially weapon. It would be like their pawns that they can throw around the world to create doubts. It's frustrating because these people are just observing something and describing what they observe. I don't know why an alien would come down and go to a whole bunch of kids in Zimbabwe and essentially show up, and then suddenly those kids never change their story. After 20, 30 years, they're still saying, yeah, when I was a kid, this alien came down and popped up. I don't know why they do that. I don't know why there's high strangeness with certain events. But what I do know is that they do proactively affect the evidence. And I know it's very convenient for Neil deGrasse Tyson and thinking that people are just validating their belief. And I'm sorry that the evidence is not exactly how you want it, but that's just the nature of dealing with something that may not want you to know about it. Obviously, they're doing something that is important to them that is also important for them to keep secrets or for them to essentially muddy the water. It's like, why does Star Trek have the Prime Directive? Why do they even have that concept? Imagine if in Star Trek they go to a new planet with a brand new species and they're doing everything that they can to essentially not give evidence. And then one of the medicine men in the species goes, oh, you see, this is just the way that you validate your own belief. There's nothing. That's just the reflection of the starlight. It's like, man, there are so many concepts related to the possibility that aliens want to be secret. And it's so frustrating when skeptics use that as their anchor to essentially say, no, you're full of crap. You're just made out of self-serving biases. I'm sorry. I don't know why I get so upset. Maybe it's because I study psychology and it hits me in a certain way. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to go to my happy place after that, and so I grabbed myself a cup of coffee. Look, I also want to add to the argument that, as we talked about earlier, that individuals like Bob Bigelow were specifically talking about how the evidence is something that it's as if like something is preventing the evidence. And so I'm sure the people who are into the subject or who claim to have seen this, they would love to have the hardcore evidence. But when he claims that there's no viral video or no pictures, there are pictures of UFOs all the time. There are videos of UFOs. And what's really interesting is that some of the evidence that I've shown on this channel, some of the better evidence that I've shown, these images that seem to be undeniable, well, that was captured by somebody who not only claimed to have been abducted by aliens, but he said that in order to capture these, when he realized that they're up there, I don't know if he gets a feeling or if he just takes a glimpse of them, but he says that he tries every single thing that he can to not pull out his camera and just shoot at them because it's as if they know about it. So he literally talks about how he tries to grab his phone slowly and just kind of snap a shot, almost not even trying to think about it. And that's how he captures some of his UFOs. So I get the argument that he's making that if somebody wants to fake something, you can't disprove a negative. I can't, if I tell you, hey, there's a pink elephant that's invisible behind me, you can't disprove it because I claimed that it was invisible. And he's making the same argument that people who are trying to capture evidence but aren't able to, that we are essentially calling out invisible elephants. But as I said earlier, there are people who captured evidence, and there's also evidence from credible individuals like Bob Bigelow that specifically shows that this type of evidence is being fuddled with. That whoever brought the warp drive, whatever type of technology to come down here, they seem to use their technologic prowess to prevent us from capturing hardcore evidence. And there is evidence. There's just not enough, at least not to his standards.
That's your way to maintain your alien belief system by saying that. And I don't have a problem with it. Go get him. Mm-hmm. Go get him. But all of what has been put forth as evidence for aliens, to me, is insufficient evidence to excite my interest, my research interest in devoting time to finding it out. But it definitely has excited other people. I have not stopped them. I am not saying defund the military program on UAPs, which of course is just updated UFO. Right?
I know they like to say that now because there's like a stigma to UFO.
Yeah, I know. That's just that's a really transparent,
sneaky way of doing it.
No, it's not even sneaky. It's actually, I think it's embarrassing. It's like maybe if we call them UAPs,
people take them seriously.
People will take them seriously.
Now, let me just remind the audience that when he says it's embarrassing, he's talking about military personnel. He's talking about people with extensive aviation experience, like Fife Symington, who was also a governor, who claimed he saw a craft that was as big as a football field in Phoenix. He was also part of the Air Force, so he has aviation skills, and he was a governor. He's saying it's also embarrassing for individuals like Gordon Cooper, who was a Mercury astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, who was not only part of the U.S. Navy at a certain point, he was also one of the Apollo astronauts. Dr. Brian O'Leary, another astronaut. These are individuals who have specifically talked about UFOs being real, that they are certain UFOs are real. And then, of course, there are individuals from the U.S. Navy, the military. We're talking about David Fravor, the jet fighter, who actually saw this thing and reported it moving like a bullet that just stops out of nowhere. We're talking about people in the military. We're talking about people with aviation skills. We're talking about U.S. astronauts. So is that what he means? Embarrassing? that it's embarrassing that those individuals are courageous enough to talk about what they thought they said? What about Dennis Kucinich, a U.S. presidential candidate? What about all the senators that are getting into this? Are they also embarrassing?
That they're probably akin to what we did on Mars. I don't think there's aliens in them. I have a feeling that these things are probes. And I feel like if you just think about biological entities flying through the universe, like, why do that?
Right.
When you have sophisticated technology that's good enough right now from our like relatively primitive in consideration of what we think is possible a million years from now, right? But we could send that Mars rover around. We have a helicopter on Mars. I mean, there's multiple satellites flying through the universe right now taking images. We can do all that.
Yeah, but
And going on Joe Rogan's point about them being probes, I think that there is a logical fallacy with this whole concept because, one, you're kind of admitting that there is some kind of hyper technology that's able to come from some other place. But to say that they're all probes would be denying the very information that happened in the 60s when people were claiming to be abducted. Now, these individuals who came out, like Barney Hill, they weren't happy to talk about it. Most of them were very embarrassed. But what they're claiming, the big claim, like what happened to Travis Walton, the guy from Fire in the Sky, you know, what happened to these individuals is they encountered a being. They encountered some kind of being. So to say that those cases are not related would be, I think there's a logical fallacy. Because when you're talking about triangular crafts and circular crafts in the past, and then that's what we're seeing in the future, unless the government somehow figured out how to control gravity and decided to disguise the crafts to look like circular and triangle just to create intelligence operations so that people would think it's whatever they thought was in the past that wasn't real. That's what I mean by there's a logical fallacy. There's probably a connection for whatever we're seeing in the 60s and 70s and what we're seeing now. And if there's a connection, then we have to also believe in the alien abductions because that phenomenon is one-on-one with the cases of UFOs. It's like there's a marriage between those two concepts. You can't just take one and not take the other, in my opinion.
they're not targeting the Martian military.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt too much, but also, even if it was probes, we also have to remember that if you're talking about going from 0 to tens of thousands of miles in a split second, well, probes also cannot do that. What do you think happens to a speeding bullet when it suddenly stops? It basically explodes. Any object that goes that type of speed and stops all of a sudden, unless they're already controlling gravity, then there's no sense of thinking that it's a probe just because it seems to be defying laws of physics. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
There's no Martian military. But if there were, we certainly
just
would.
sitting out in the open.
Right, but if we had something like, are you familiar with one of the most famous cases was a case with Commander David Fravor of the Navy, who encountered with one or two other jets off of the Nimitz. They encountered this thing that was shaped like a Tic Tac.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know the story.
Everybody knows this, yeah.
This story. It went from, they tracked it going from 80,000 feet above sea level to 50 in less than a second. They have no idea how it moved. There's no visible propulsion system.
Mm-hmm.
It was blocking their radar. It was actively blocking tracking.
This is what they're set.
So they're actively blocking the radar, actively blocking the tracker. So just those words alone is already kind of giving us a hint as to what their modus operandi might be. So they're seeing these things up there, but for some reason, the devices that they have are not being able to record them. It kind of goes back to the point that I was making earlier.
Yes.
Told them.
Exactly.
Just be clear about that.
And then
you're stating information as though it is facts.
I'm stating information as Commander
I
Fravor
don't care.
relayed
That
it.
doesn't matter. He's human,
Right.
and we're all human here.
Don't be rude, man.
But
I
as
understand
a
what you're
scientist, when you're presenting information, you don't say, this thing was at 80,000 feet and it dropped to zero to sea level in 1 second, or whatever it was, the
Yes.
measure. That's the wrong way to report it. What you say is, we have sensors that told us this is what happened.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay?
Yes.
That's a very important distinction.
Yes.
And so now, all right, your first question then, tell me about the sensors.
Yeah.
Okay, are they double checked? Are they, and so, but if you're just going to say there's this craft at 80,000, then everyone is thinking about a craft, and no one is thinking about the sensor.
They actually saw it with their eyes too. This is something that they actually got.
You can't see something.
That's
at
the main
80,000
point.
feet.
No, the actual.
That's the main
visual
point.
On the
They
craft.
saw it
They didn't
with the
see it at
radar
80,000 feet.
and their
It was
eyes.
craft. It's not just something that was tracked with equipment.
Got it, but they didn't see it at 80,000 feet.
Right.
That's my point. So, by the way, this level of
I didn't see it 80,000 feet. That's my point. No, your point was that the sensors could be off. What Joe is saying is that it was both the sensors and their eyes. And it goes to a point that's about to come up because he's going to make a comparison, and it's just an awful comparison, but I'll just play on and we'll get there.
to the detail and the reporting of information. We do that with fellow scientists for much less
Oh, for sure.
than if we're being visited by intelligent aliens from another planet. Go visit it. Go to a scientific conference and watch the level of scrutiny we put on other people's work. If they have a sensor that has a new result, we'll say, did you calibrate the sensor? How long has the sensor been in use? I'll give you an example. Here's an example, okay? Do you remember Planet X?
Yes.
The search for Planet X.
Nibiru.
That was one, there were several incarnations of Planet X.
Right.
That was among them, okay?
That was the most wacky.
I'm talking about 100 years ago, Planet X, okay?
Yes. 100 years ago?
Well, there's several Planet X's, right? So Uranus was moving weirdly, nobody understood. Maybe there's a planet beyond it whose gravity we have yet to reckon in our equations. Oh, boom! We discover Neptune. Wait a minute, Neptune is moving a little.
So I'm going to kind of stop him because he takes way too long to explain this. But what he's trying to say is that Neptune got discovered because of gravitational perturbations. And then they were looking for another planet that was disturbing Neptune. And then they eventually found Pluto. But Pluto actually wasn't big enough to create the gravitational disturbance that they thought was what was affecting Neptune until one of the scientists essentially cleaned out his sensors, and then all the equations lined up. So essentially there was no gravitational anomaly that would account for Planet X. And that if they had not been searching exhaustively for what they thought was this other planet, they may not have found Pluto, which is about 1/5 the size of the moon in terms of mass, and it's just this tiny, tiny, tiny little speck in the sky. But because they were looking at it so intensely, expecting to find something, they found Pluto, which is not the planet that would have explained away the perturbations in Neptune, but nonetheless, they found it anyways. And so the moral of the story is that clean your sensors. But what I love about his comparison is that he uses gravitational perturbation as the main aspect of how scientists discover other planets. I should also note that gravitational perturbation was how they discovered that Sirius star system had 3 stars. And the moment that NASA discovered this in 1994, something remarkable happened. It confirmed the ancient story of the Dogon people who talked about how their gods came from the Sirius star system that was composed of 3 stars. The Dogon people who said that their gods lived in the 2nd star, well, they actually gave a description for the 3rd star, which they call Potolo, and Po means either seed or atom. In a sense, something that's extremely dense. And what they discovered with this 3rd star is that it was a white dwarf that because of how cool it is, it cannot be seen in a telescope. But white dwarfs are also extremely, extremely dense objects. Like we're talking about, like if you were to stand on a white dwarf, you would essentially just squash down like a pancake because it's that dense. So how the hell did they know about this? And I just thought it was kind of ironic that he uses gravitational perturbation as the way to affirm what the scientists are able to do, when in reality that's also what allowed people to see that cultures like the Dogon people are actually saying something that is real. This was actually recorded by French anthropologists in 1922, meaning it took 72 years before the space program of NASA could confirm those claims. I think that's amazing.
Planet X evaporated in that instant. Neptune fell right onto Newton's laws. And so since 1993, there is no Planet X. And Pluto, and were it not for that, we probably would have been a long time before we discovered Pluto because no one would have looked for it.
They found another, like,
Let me just finish
Pluto
the lesson there.
Okay.
The lesson there is you have information that you think is correct from your sensors. This was an observatory, a fine observatory. And you're going to say, this observatory says Neptune is misbehaving. But then you learned there was something wrong with the data.
This is the worst analogy I could imagine, talking about how sensors can fail. And that's what the first thing that these Air Force pilots or whoever's spotting UFOs should be doing, that they should be checking their sensors. The reason why it's a horrible analogy is because you cannot see Pluto with your naked eye. But these pilots could directly see the UFOs darting at incredible speeds. In fact, there are images that were released by Jeremy Corbell that shows the objects from the fighter's cockpit. So he's talking about how you can't trust your sensor because of an object that you cannot see. Thus, the sensor becomes the only way to verify the possibility of the object's existence. And then he tries to analogize that with something that is being confirmed both with sensors and with vision, or sometimes with vision and no sensors, like when the radar is being blocked. So one thing is constantly being double confirmed, and the other one, you can only rely on one source. He's saying that we can't trust something that can be doubly confirmed because of his analogy, which is completely dependent on only one source. It's a horrible, horrible analogy. It makes no sense whatsoever what he's saying right now.
You throw it out. So I'm trying to say this happens all the time in science. You have to be careful what you're analyzing before you declare that what the thing measured is true, and then realign all your resources to address what you think is true, when it might have just simply been a glitch or multiple glitches or anything. And we do this all the time in science.
Catch new episodes.
And for anybody who works at YouTube who's getting angry that some small YouTuber guy is going off, an astrophysicist, look, my dad's a theoretical physicist. He's a mathematician. He's basically a genius. So I've lived with this man and encountered these arguments over and over. So I'm not coming from left field and just making these arguments. I also worked as a research assistant at the UC Santa Barbara Social Psychology Lab. I was also doing very well scholastically. So I'm only saying this because of this whole like fact check. Oh, we can't trust the everyday person. You know, we talked about the virus coming from a lab. We got that video demonetized. Now it's becoming common knowledge. So what's with that? Are you going to stop trusting individuals just because you find them to not be qualified? I think all the reasons that we talked about in this episode is scholastically valid. I think it makes sense what we said. And one last point that I also wanted to bring up is that the whole idea that the evidence could be screwed with, that also might have created certain concepts like the Fermi paradox, which may not even be a real paradox. So if you're not familiar, the Fermi paradox is saying, well, aliens by all accounts should be here by the fact that there are tens, if not hundreds of billions of Earth-like planets in the Milky Way. Look how far we've gotten technologically speaking in only a couple hundred years. We went from horses to now shooting objects into space. So if all of this is happening, why are we not encountering aliens? And if we're not encountering aliens, does this imply that we are essentially a rarity, that we are a lottery chance encounter? The aliens will never develop because of another assumption, like perhaps all species that get to certain technology end up destroying themselves, which I don't think is true because certain species are going to be more collective thinking. Species are going to have different cultural norms. They could be more like bees, where they're absolute servants to this single queen. And of course, they're going to behave differently. So you can't just assume away from what humans are doing or the possibility that we could destroy ourselves, even though we have not destroyed ourselves yet after decades and decades and decades of having nuclear weapons. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Fermi paradox may not even be a paradox. That if these beings are proactively trying to destroy the evidence, we're not going to be able to produce enough evidence to convince individuals like Neil deGrasse Tyson, even though I do think there is evidence. There is the implants that Dr. Lear uncovered. I think that was actually Jeremy Corbell's first film. I didn't know this until the other day, that he actually made a documentary about Dr. Lear. I thought that was kind of cool because we've been talking about him for a while. But I guess the point is that there is all kinds of evidence. There's just not enough acceptance of the evidence that is out there, because the evidence may not be plentiful enough, and they might come in a way that is somewhat fleeting. And look, if the evidence is out there, it's not like aliens would just get proven, because it's a two-way street. For evidence to be able to prove that aliens exist, the evidence, one, has to exist, two, it has to be accepted. And I think when we watch an interview like this, it's obvious that there are certain people who will never accept the evidence that is out there. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have your own UFO footage, pictures, anything that you've seen that you would like us to analyze, and we'll analyze honestly. Like if we think it's nothing, we'll say that it's nothing. But if you do want to send it, you can reach me at EaFiles.contact@gmail.com. Thank you so much for following me. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.